It's time to cross over once again today, and the topic is two teams that have done plenty of cross-pollinating themselves with the Indianapolis Colts and the Philadelphia Eagles. Last weekend's results actually make this matchup a must-watch on Sunday, which just a couple weeks ago would have seemed weird to say. Thank you all for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering both your Indianapolis Colts and Philadelphia Eagles. We're all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And of course, Crossover Thursdays are presented by our friends at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is so much fun and it's easy to play. There's no competing with other players. It's just you versus the projections that are available. Just pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projections, then you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. It can literally take less than 60 seconds to enter. It's that easy. We love Prize Picks, and we know that you guys will too. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. That's prizepicks.com, promo code LOCKEDON. All right, everybody. So this is Jake Arthur of Locked On Colts, and I'm joined by Louie DiBiase of Locked On Eagles. Today, it's all about this Indianapolis Colts versus Philadelphia Eagles matchup, man. The 8-1 Eagles coming off their first loss finally. They were the last undefeated team in the league. 4-5-1 Colts, that doesn't sound like a great record because it's not, but they are actually coming off a win for the first time in a few weeks this week. This matchup is at Lucas Oil Stadium. The Colts are back after a couple-week hiatus on the road. So, Louie, welcome on, man. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, Jake, first time we're doing a show together. It's going to be an exciting matchup. Not what I thought it would have been when the schedule came out. Thought maybe this would be the Carson Wentz revenge game. Didn't end up getting that. But yeah, I think it's an important game for both teams. And, you know, for Colts fans, I'm more interested in their perspective of what's good for them long-term when it comes to wins and losses the rest of the way. But for the Eagles, trying to stay up in this NFC race, holding on to the 1 seed with, you know, Minnesota's right behind them now at 8-1, and the New York Giants are at 7-2, so they got to keep stacking wins. It's crazy, 7 games over 500, and you can't be comfortable at all.
No, absolutely not. The Colts at 4-5-1, they're actually still in this thing. The AFC is really, really jumbled, especially the AFC South. No one is really running away with it. The Titans always kind of at the top. The Jaguars, you know, they're in the mix, but the Colts kind of dug themselves a hole with they had like 5 of their first 6 AFC South matchups were already done within the first several weeks, and they did not do favorably. So, man, if Jeff Saturday really provides a spark, you know, the Raiders were a bad team. They beat that team last week, but I think this is a true barometer game because the Colts are kind of going from 2 extremes. One of the worst teams last week to arguably the best with the Eagles.
Jake, do you feel like with Saturday now going back to Matt Ryan, it was interesting because when they fired Frank Reich, and even before that, when maybe it was Frank that decided this, maybe it was, you know, the front office or ownership that decided to go to Sam Ehlinger earlier in the year, it almost felt like they were finally saying, okay, let's hit the reset button. Let's see what this young kid has. If he fails, great. We have a top pick in what is seen as a strong quarterback class. But now Saturday comes in and it feels like he's almost, and again, this is from afar, my national perspective. It almost feels like, you know, he's trying to prove he can be a head coach at this level. So he puts Matt Ryan back in and, you know, they win this game. It's just interesting for the Colts, like the short term versus the long term. These decisions they're making, I think, has been fascinating to watch.
Yeah, it's no secret that they're going to need all the assets possible to get a long-term quarterback in this next coming offseason. So it seemed like, you know, putting a beloved figure like Jeff Saturday out there, you know, kind of putting a pretty face on an ugly product and kind of letting them tank in peace. But they've been adamant that they're not waving the white flag. And this does seem like a team that wants to win, especially coming off a win right now. That's a contagious feeling. They're going to want to keep doing that. If they're competitive with the Eagles, and God forbid if they beat them, then that's going to send this team, they're going to have their playoff hopes back. It's going to be like a training camp feeling again, where, you know, they're back to 0-0 basically. So a lot of the cynical part of us that represent the Colts, we were ready for them to just pack it in, and, you know, maybe they get a win or 2 left in the season, get a great draft pick, you know, do what you can to build yourself up positively for the long term. But that is not what this team is looking into doing. That's for sure.
And it feels like that was kind of where the Eagles were at a year ago in 2021. The roster was good, not great. You had a quarterback that you weren't winning because of, but you were winning with. And it was like you were just stuck in almost this purgatory. And to see that, I was kind of nervous they were going to get into that long-term purgatory of where they're not bad enough to have top picks and grab one of those top prospects, but they also weren't good enough to be a championship contender. And to me, I don't want to fight for wild card spots every year. So the fact that, you know, Jalen Hurts on the Eagles side did end up becoming that answer is so huge. You know, the fact that the Eagles are 8-1 right now and he's a top MVP candidate, it's really big. So yeah, both teams definitely on different timelines. You know, with the Eagles, got to keep stacking wins, as I said. It's going to have to come, though, with some elevation because there is a bunch of injuries right now to this team. Dallas Goedert, their star tight end, today was placed on, or I should say on Wednesday, was placed on injured reserve. Their defensive tackle, Jordan Davis, is on IR. Their slot cornerback, and Avonte Maddox, on IR. So they're a little banged up for the first time. I feel like they're finally facing some adversity this year. It was a pretty smooth sailing 2 months, of course, as you mentioned, being the only undefeated team left in football at 8-0 before that game against Washington.
Yeah, the Colts have had some injury issues as well. They've gotten used to playing without Shaquille Leonard this year. He's only played in a few games, really. But he's out for good now after having back surgery yesterday. So luckily their linebackers are playing well in his absence, but you definitely miss that element of playmaking ability. It's like, you know, in the games he hasn't been out there, you know, they've really struggled to force turnovers. And he had one of his real serious games back recently, and right away, you know, he had the interception. You know, you're just sitting there watching that game like they really need a turnover, and boom, he made his return that game, and there's the turnover. So they'll definitely miss that. The defense is more, they try to be a shutdown unit that they just don't create very many turnovers, which is odd because that used to be their bread and butter, you know, the last several years under Matt Eberflus, but not so much the case anymore. So
I feel like the Eagles too right now with, you know, both sides of the ball, they were healthy throughout the entire season. And, you know, although they're facing some adversity right now, that's kind of expected in the NFL. You know, that you're going to lose games. You're not going to be undefeated the rest of the way. As kind of fun as it was to follow, and they had a pretty favorable schedule, so you thought maybe they could pull it off. But you know, the injuries too, they happen to every NFL team. I'm just glad that it's not happening even with these injuries. None of these are season enders, and it's not to the severity of what you saw in, you know, 2017 to 2020. Basically, Philadelphia was the most injury ravaged team in football. The fact that they could get through 2 months without a lot of these serious issues is good. And I feel like they can, against the Colts and the rest of the way, for the next month or two while they're waiting for these, you know, key players to come back. I think they can weather that storm. So it'll be interesting to see, though, if anything changes with their approach on either side of the ball on Sunday in Indy.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing. One of our local reporters is actually from Philadelphia, and she said, you know, you actually want to be rooting for the Eagles to win this game, of course, on Monday night, because you don't want to face the Eagles coming off their first loss. So that's definitely something you don't want to look forward to. But you know, if there's something I'm looking forward to with the Colts this week, you know, they've got a good feeling now. Something they haven't been able to establish at all this season is consistency or an identity on offense. You know, it always used to be the offensive line was the backbone of the team. You have this strong run game powered by Jonathan Taylor. Even before then, Marlon Mack was a 1,000-yard runner. So it's been for several years that's been their identity. And Jonathan's only got 2 100-yard games this season. It was the norm last year. You know, I think he tied an NFL record for 100-yard games and rushing touchdowns in a single game. And that's just not something we've really seen this year up until week 1 and then week 10, essentially. So definitely a different kind of season. The passing game hasn't really been there. Obviously, Sam Ehlinger made a couple starts. So Ryan is back in as the starter. You know, they had this nice kind of tune-up game against the Raiders. Let's find some consistency. Do those same things work against Philadelphia that worked against Las Vegas? Because Philadelphia is, I think, 20th against the run defensively. So I like their defensive line, but they have given up some rushing yards, especially these last few weeks. I think they're averaging 150 against them. So
yeah,
that's what I'm looking for. You know,
for sure.
I think last week was a perfect example of what their identity had always been. So can they reestablish that?
Yeah, I think identity is key for both teams. The Eagles it's kind of changed every week, and that's what I like about this offense, especially is they're very multidimensional. If they want to be one of the best rushing offenses in the league with that top tier offensive line with Jalen Hurts and Miles Sanders, they can do it. But, over the last 3 weeks, Jake, they've definitely been more of a pocket passing team. Jalen Hurts really actually hasn't run that much, and he's done his damage through the air. And I've been excited about that because, again, the rushing offense is never going to be an issue. To know they can kind of do both now, whatever the game script really calls for, the fact they can do that is key. So with the Eagles, their identity's kind of been, various each week. So what they do against the Colts will be interesting. It really does change per matchup, which we'll definitely get into coming up next.
Yeah, two similar teams. Like you said, we'll get into that next. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Blue Nile. Whether you're looking to pop the question, have a milestone to celebrate, or want to let your love sparkle, Blue Nile can help you make your celebrations even more memorable. As the original online jeweler, Blue Nile offers the largest selection of independently graded diamonds and pieces priced significantly below traditional retailers. You looking for a piece of fine jewelry to commemorate a special milestone, but still having some trouble choosing? Blue Nile has jewelry experts on hand 24/7, available via phone or chat to help you find a memorable gift at every budget. Shop stress-free with Blue Nile's 100% satisfaction guarantee. All Blue Nile orders are insured and shipped for free in discreet packaging. It's Christmas shopping season already, so that is definitely clutch. They also offer overnight shipping if you're in a rush. Make your moment sparkle with Blue Nile. Go to BlueNile.com and use code LOCKEDON to save $50 on your purchase of $500 or more. That's BlueNile.com, code LOCKEDON to save $50 on your purchase of $500 or more. BlueNile.com, code LOCKEDON. And today's episode is also brought to you by our friends at Tommy John. If you guys hate getting stuck in Black Friday crowds, of course you do. It's super uncomfortable. However, shopping Tommy John's Black Friday sale from your couch, now that's super duper comfortable. Whether you've given your loved ones Tommy John, they're that much more comfortable, so they can do everything better. Give the gift of brand new Tommy John underwear, loungewear, and pajamas. With over 18 million pairs sold, they've become a holiday tradition. 97% of women and men love a gift from Tommy John. That's why Tommy John doesn't have customers, they have fanatics. Shop Tommy John's Black Friday sale going on right now and get 30% off site-wide at TommyJohn.com/lockedon. 30% off everything now at TommyJohn.com/lockedon. TommyJohn.com/lockedon. See site for details. All right, Louie. So getting into kind of the micro and the nitty gritty of this game, what are some of the biggest matchups you're looking forward to seeing?
Well, you mentioned before we took a break, Jonathan Taylor and the rushing offense kind of being the identity for the Indianapolis Colts, as it should be for sure, without, a true franchise quarterback. And I think that's going to be what they want to do on Sunday is run down the Eagles' throats. And that's what a lot of teams have been able to do this year. Jordan Davis, the Eagles' first round pick from Georgia, really did kind of right the ship when he got more snaps in October, really helped this run defense get stabilized. But since he's been out the last few weeks with an ankle injury, still he's going to be out for a couple more weeks here. They've struggled again. Fletcher Cox looks like a shell of who he used to be. Javon Hargrave has 6 sacks in the last 3 games, but against the run, he has struggled. The linebackers haven't been great in that area either. They're 20th against the run. They brought in Linval Joseph, the 34-year-old nose tackle, on Wednesday, but he hasn't played since 2021. And their defensive coordinator, Jonathan Gannon, I just feel like at times has not adjusted the scheme to what they need. They have a great secondary. I think they need to stack the box more. And I'm nervous because Dameon Pierce and Brian Robinson, back-to-back weeks, a day 3 running back, has shredded this defense. And now you have to play one of the best running backs in football. If you don't adjust, it's going to be an issue. It's going to give teams that are inferior opportunities to hold on to the football, time of possession, and have a chance against you, even though you're the more talented team. So I think that's definitely the key matchup.
Yeah, and I think you're right. That's the first thing I looked at too, because how the Colts are constructed, they totally live and die by the performance of their offensive line. If the line gets overwhelmed and it's leaky and there's sacks and everything, the passing game is non-existent, and so is the run game. It's like if they're failing, it's a total system failure. They're not just run blocking or none of it works. So I'm really curious to see if they're able to do that against a better defensive line than what the Raiders provided last week. Also interesting because Parks Frazier, their new offensive play caller, had to get ready for everything on a short week. Last week was given the reins on like Tuesday, I think, Monday night, Tuesday. So kind of had to get everything ready on a short week. The game plan was very simplistic. It leaned on the things they do really well, again, which is they try to establish the run, and then Matt Ryan, really any quarterback they've had under the Frank Reich system, which Frazier still runs. Yeah. Just the quarterback is there to take what the defense gives them. And they like to do a lot of stuff over the middle of the field to create yards after the catch. Not much downfield threat whatsoever. So that's a very simple approach. Again, I'm curious if now that they've had more time to prepare a game plan for the Eagles, they've had a full week like a normal week would go. Does the game plan change at all, or do they try to establish themselves and make it more about what they do well rather than what do the Eagles not do well defensively?
Yeah.
And, both these sides know each other quite well. Of course, Nick Sirianni and Jonathan Gannon were here in Indy from 2018 to 2020. But again, Nick Sirianni knows Parks Frazier and Frank Reich's offense very well too. So it's an intriguing matchup to say the least.
I think the Eagles offense, flipping the sides of the field, without Dallas Goedert, it'll be interesting what they do. They still have A.J. Brown. They still have DeVonta Smith. I'm sure they'll run more for sure with Miles Sanders and this top tier offensive line. But I think the way Jalen Hurts is playing right now, he has enough weapons still to get the job done through the air. So I still think it's going to be a very balanced attack as it's been throughout the majority of the year. And again, it's just really whatever the game calls for. I think keep an eye out more without Dallas Goedert, and there's not a quick fix here at tight end. They activated Tyree Jackson from the PUP list, but he's a very inexperienced player, young, switched from quarterback to tight end. They've got Jack Stahl, who's mostly a run-blocking tight end. They have Grant Calcaterra, a rookie 7th-round pick. So really, they don't have a lot of options there to take advantage of that matchup. I would expect probably just an increased volume of targets for Brown and Smith and Quez Watkins as well, their third string receiver, and maybe even a former Colt, Zach Pascal. I think that, Nick Sirianni said it in his press conference Wednesday. You're not going to replace Dallas Goedert. You have to do it by committee with receivers here. I think you're going to see more 4 receiver sets, maybe some empty set looks with both Pascal and Watkins on the field. Quez Watkins is a very fast burning wide receiver. Had a key fumble on Monday night, but had over 80 yards, including a 50-yard bomb. He's a good player that is explosive. You got to keep an eye out for where he is at all times. And without Goddard, I think there's going to be an increased volume for him, Pascal, and these wide receivers.
And that, again, that's a really good point you bring up, because the Colts have done well overall against really good receivers, but they haven't really faced many teams that have 2 really good guys with DeVonta Smith and A.J. Brown. And like you mentioned, Quez Watkins and Zach Pascal they're not slouches either. Gilmore is probably going to be matched up with Brown a lot of the time. But what's really going to be interesting is Isaiah Rodgers versus his opportunities against Brown and DeVonta Smith. He's actually been a shutdown corner, and not many people know about it. He's only been targeted like 10 times this year. He's giving up very little. He did well against Devontae Adams of the Raiders last week. He's occasionally going to give up some things, but he's really been a lockdown corner this year. So this is another huge test, because it's not like you're off of AJ Brown and then you get a break, because it's going to be DeVonta Smith or a guy with burning speed like Watkins. And that's actually Rodgers. One of his biggest strengths is his twitchiness and his speed. He was a sub 4.3 guy before his draft class as well. So that should be a good matchup, because, Smith is a really fast guy too. So those were kind of my matchups as well, as I was curious how they'll perform against a really quality committee of receivers.
No, that's the thing. And again, you're not going to replace Dallas Goedert, but you have all those receivers. And I think still you're going to run the football a lot. Miles Sanders has been very good in a contract year. He's trying to get a deal. I don't know if it's going to be with Philadelphia, but I think it's going to be a very balanced attack. So it's going to be an interesting matchup between these two teams. Very different identities at times. And, I think the key matchup, though, again, Jake, and I think you would agree, is really Jonathan Taylor against the interior defensive line of the Eagles. You mentioned the talent the Eagles have up front, but most of it's pass rushing talent. I am definitely nervous about the Colts' time of possession, because that's how Washington won that football game on Monday. So that's going to be the key.
Yeah, and my last little matchup nugget I wanted to mention, just because he's been kind of on fire lately, is Paris Campbell. And, if Avonte Maddox is now out, it looks like Josiah Scott might be vulnerable.
Definitely the weak link in the secondary for sure. Paris Campbell, by the way, Jake, the guy the Eagles would have drafted if they didn't draft J.J. Arcega-Whiteside in 2019. Really? Yeah, so, he's actually been heating up for sure. And so that's definitely a matchup to watch out for. Josiah Scott, he's started in 3 games for Avonte Maddox this year. He's held his own, but definitely not Maddox at all. In man coverage, that definitely is a matchup to keep an eye out for. And the Eagles don't really have cornerbacks shadow, so it's going to be pretty much Darius Slay's on one side, James Bradbury's on the other, and Josiah Scott's in the middle. So if the Colts want to stay away from Slay and Bradbury, that'll definitely be a mismatch, I would say, to take a look at.
Yeah, they've gotten Campbell a lot more involved lately. But before we move on and give you guys what you want, what you came for, the predictions, we're going to tell you about our sponsor, BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source. Sorry, give me 1 second. BetOnline is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From football to basketball, soccer, esports, they've got it all at BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, well, you can find those there as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Louie, rolling out the red carpet on this one. I'll give it to you first. What is your final score prediction for Colts Eagles? How do you think it all plays out?
Yeah, I don't think this is going to be a blowout for sure. I think, again, the Colts' key is going to be time of possession. I think they're going to try to control the football and run it with Jonathan Taylor. I do think the Eagles bounce back here and get their 9th win of the season, get to 9-1. They're a motivated team. And, I don't think they're a kind of team that'll start spiraling. I think on both sides of the ball, they're too talented and just too well prepared, unlike past Eagles teams that even when they were talented, if things started to kind of roll downhill, it would kind of pick up steam. So I think they're good at stopping that kind of momentum. I think they'll get a win. Score prediction, I'll say, the Eagles are very good at getting at least, 28 plus points. I'll go 30-17, 30-20. I'll say 30-20. Maybe the Colts get a late score. I think the Eagles will win this one though.
Yeah, I'm not yet ready to say the Colts are going to go on any sort of run yet. It's great they got this win against the Raiders.
Yeah,
I think they're trending in the right direction. I think everything that happened a couple weeks ago with Frank Reich and bringing Jeff Saturday in lit a fire under them. But I'm not yet ready to say they're going to beat a team like the Eagles. Plus, like I mentioned earlier, I don't love that the Eagles are coming off their first loss. Yeah. Just like you said, I don't see consecutive losses in their future. So I have it as 24-20 Eagles. I'm going to give the Colts a little more juice offensively. I think they can get to 20 points again. 25 was only their second highest of the season last week. I just think this is kind of what they're going to be now. They're going to be competitive. They took advantage of one of the league's worst teams. I think they'll be competitive against the good teams, but not necessarily to win all of those games.
Yeah.
I think another big thing, it always comes down to them. How did the offensive line play? Because it's usually either awful or really good. There's not much in between. And do they take care of the football? Because turnovers have been an enormous issue. Like, they're very good at shooting themselves in the foot.
And the Eagles are the number one defense this year in turnovers forced, Jake. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, their safety right now, has 6 interceptions, and he has an interception in 5 straight games. So they're kind of red hot in that area.
Exactly. I was looking at that today, looking at stats leading up to this. The Eagles were the best in turnover differential, and they don't really give the ball up much either. I think 7 turnovers this year, so that's a really tough offense. The offense takes care of the ball, and it's a tough defense to play. It's a lot like the Colts were the last couple of years with Sirianni, honestly. Yeah. Any final thoughts on this one before we wrap it up?
Yeah, Jake, I think it's going to be an exciting game. I think, like you said, the Colts were kind of riding that high. It felt like almost the pressure was off once Frank Reich got fired. I think you see a lot of teams when they get a new interim head coach, a lot of the time they win that first game. Some of it feels like maybe they're more relaxed and the pressure's off. Maybe they feel a little more motivated and embarrassed because they got their coach, fired mid-season. But I do feel like, that momentum can only take you so far. And it almost feels like they emptied out the tank. And I feel like the Eagles are just, too talented of a team to win this game. But I still think it's going to be close. The Colts are 4-5-1. So they have a chance. The Eagles can't overlook this opponent. And, considering the importance of the standings right now, they got to keep loading up wins. So this is definitely a big one for Philly and for Colts fans too, if you want to make the playoffs. So I'm excited about this one.
Yeah, no doubt. The Colts have kind of dug themselves into a hole at this point to where every game is a playoff game from here on out. And
wild card's tough too, Jake. I mean, you look at it might have to be the division with all these AFC teams fighting for a spot.
Yeah, without a doubt. And like you said, it's something we've mentioned on Locked On Colts throughout the week is you're riding a high after this first win, and then it's kind of trying to find your level after that because a lot of these interim guys do win first. We mentioned Steve Wilks with the Panthers. I forget what their first game was, but they had early on with Wilks, they trounced the Buccaneers, for example, and then they've leveled out. So very curious to see how they respond after their first win. But I think that's it for us, everybody. Stay tuned to both Locked On Colts and Locked On Eagles leading up to and after Sunday's game for the best takes out there. On Twitter, follow @LockedOnBirds and @DiBiaseLOE, as well as @LockedOnColts, @JakeArthurNFL, and also both shows on YouTube, Locked On Colts, Locked On Eagles. Got to get those subscriber numbers up. We appreciate anything you guys are willing to give us. Thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. And now for your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. That's the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you guys tomorrow.